very important commemoration of the Armenian genocide. It's a privilege and responsibility, and one which I really do treasure. So thank you, Your Graces, and wonderful to be here with ambassadors and other excellencies, and of course with Armenian friends. Very precious. Just in case you haven't met me before, I'd like to introduce myself very briefly, in case you wonder how I began to be involved in the wonderful series of experiences with your wonderful people, both in Armenia and in the Holy Land of Artsakh. When I introduce myself, I always say, you may have heard this before, in which case you can have a sleep. I always say I'm a nurse and a social scientist by intention and a Baroness by astonishment. I was not born a Baroness. I was appointed to the House of Lords. I wasn't into politics. I was the first Baroness I ever met. I was shocked to wake up one morning and find a Baroness looking at yourself out of the bathroom mirror. And you'd say, well, God, thank you, what a privilege, but how do I use it? And the message came very clearly. To be able to speak in the House of Lords is a wonderful place to be a voice for people whose voices are not heard. And that's how I try to use my role there. And in the very early days, I'm very old, I'm 85. I was appointed to the House of Lords in 1983, can't believe it. But in the 1980s, I did a lot of work in Poland that was suffering very much in the dark days of martial law. And then I did quite a lot of work in the Soviet Union with orphan and abandoned children. But in that context, I think I got known, and the name means something to the older members here. Yelena Sakharov, the widow of the famous Andrei Sakharov, invited me to take part in a big conference in Moscow. And I was chairing a session on human rights, and a member of that session, the name might be known to some of you indeed, the famous Zori Balayan, the leader of Artsakh. He was there, and he just really told us about the suffering of the people from Nagorno-Karabakh. And I quoted this, plus the suffering, of course, of the Armenian in general, back to the main complete conference, and I was invited to go in a delegation down to Armenia. And that was my first visit there. What a privilege. And as you rightly said, Ambassador, I've been swamped over 90 times. I haven't counted, but it's been a privilege. But of course, many of those were during the tragic war in the early 1990s, when Azerbaijan was trying to annihilate the Armenians, and it was a horrendous military offensive. I was in Stepanakert many times, and I used to count 400 Grad missiles a day pounding in on that little capital city. That's a human rights violation. It's a war crime. It was a civilian city, but 400 Grad missiles a day pounding in was a war crime. But of course, it was annihilating the city. But the Armenians fought back with incredible courage. And I also visited some of the places which were attacked. And one was a town not so far from Stepanakert called Hojalu. Now, Hojalu was used as a base by the Azeris to fire the Grad onto Stepanakert. Interestingly, Azerbaijan is at the moment very active in its propaganda and promoting its own point of view. Because a week ago last Monday, there was a question asked in the House of Lords at question time by someone who has been briefed by Azerbaijan, and it talked about the terrible treatment of the Armenians and called the massacre at Hojalu, and would the British government send a message of sympathy to the survivors of the massacre at Hojalu. Well, fortunately, I was there, and I was able to stand up and say that I was present in Nagorno-Karabakh many times, and I was around at the time of the tragedy of what happened at Hojalu, and it was not a massacre by the Armenians at all. It was the Azeris' attempt to try and get the Armenians out of there, and the Armenians had to defend their right to be there. But they're decent, good people. Your people are valiant and courageous people. And your military forces warned the Azeris in Hojalu that they were going to have to take this attack the following Monday. Would they evacuate any civilians and so on, to give advance warning, which is not always an easy thing to do in a military situation. But Azerbaijan did not allow the civilians to go, and when the Armenians started to attack, they saw there were still civilians there, they halted the attack and tried to ask the Azeris to let the Armenians out, but they didn't. They sort of played with amongst the Armenians. Both sides, I'm afraid, suffered casualties or suffered deaths. And the Armenians allowed the Azeris to go back and collect their dead, and they treated them with respect. But I'm afraid the Azeris mutilated the Armenians beyond recognition. Heartbreaking. But I got that on the record, and it's important to get these things on the record, because the truth was told. And it was very important that we understand the truth, not the propaganda being promoted by Azerbaijan. I also, in that answer to that question, mentioned, and it's maybe something to some of you who were at war, the terrible massacre which we witnessed at the little town of Marahar, when Azerbaijan attacked the civilians, and they were just civilians, but they were attacked by Azeri forces, many were beheaded, and we saw the decapitated corpses of those on the ground, and the homes still burning. We got that on the record too. So it's a very different question from that which Azerbaijan had intended to go on the record. But it's so important to get the truth on the record. And our government. I am deeply worried about our government's policies with regard to Armenia and Artsakh and Azerbaijan. After one of those visits, when I'd been there during the war, I returned with photographs that I had taken of children who had been shredded by cluster bombs. Now that's a war crime, not going to use cluster bombs against civilians. Anyhow, I went to a very senior person in the Foreign Office. I won't mention his name. So, oh, sorry. Thank you. Thank you so much. Do you hear all that before? Yes. Don't worry, I will repeat it. Is that deafening you?
No.
Okay. Well, the story which I was going to tell relates to when I'd come back from one of my visits to Artsakh, Karabakh, and had these photographs of children shredded by cluster bombs, which is a war crime. You're not meant to use cluster bombs against civilians. I went to a very senior person in the Foreign Office. I have to keep this anonymous because it was an unofficial briefing, but a very senior person in the Foreign Office. And I showed the photographs of these Armenian kids shredded by cluster bombs. And I said, would the British government make representations to the government of Azerbaijan to stop dropping cluster bombs on civilians? It's against international law. The reply? No country has an interest in other countries, only interests. We have oil interest in Azerbaijan. Good morning. I came out so infuriated and mortified. I've quoted that on the floor of the House, so I'm not telling you secrets. It's on the record in Hansard. But I think it perhaps underpins our British foreign policy towards Azerbaijan. It explains a lot, which is very, very tragic. Well, after the ceasefire, I set up my own little organisation to work with victims of oppression and persecution, largely unreached by other aid organisations, hardly reached by anyone. And of course, so we visited, and we asked the local people, I always believe in doing this, what was their priority for help. We don't tell people what we're going to do. Go to school, it might be good, might not. But we give them the dignity of choice. And the people in Artsakh said, we are desperate for help for people with disabilities. The Soviet Union had no care for people with disabilities at all. I know that because I was there and I saw that. And so the fact that the Soviet Union, there wasn't any care for people with disabilities. If you had a disability, you were just, you might be looked after, but there was no treatment, no help. And that was what the people of Artsakh wanted. So we have a wonderful, wonderful hero of the peace, Baroness, who is a specialist in looking after people with disabilities. They gave us a bombed-out old building in Stepanakert, where the buildings weren't bomb damaged. And Baroness and his wonderful team have turned that bombed-out old building into what is now internationally recognized as a centre of excellence, international centre of excellence. Not so very long ago, head of the ICRC visited the rehab centre, and she worked in many countries, and she was an expert. She said it was the best, most inspirational rehabilitation centre she'd seen in any of the 40 different countries where she had worked and where she had visited. That's what people do. And you're wonderful people. And Baroness is a real hero of the peace, and all his staff. And they care for the whole spectrum, from little babies with Down syndrome, physical disabilities, autism and so on, to people with accidents, sadly, wounded soldiers in the current wars, elderly people with strokes, and they also do home visits. It really is a centre of excellence. And it is still functioning now in the context of Azeri aggression, the threats and the blockade. And we do have Zoom calls with Arden, and we do get updates from him about what is happening there. And as I'm sure you're aware, there are serious serious challenges facing your people in the current situation in Artsakh. The blockade of the road from Armenia to Artsakh, which began on December the 12th, that was the only route for food, for medical supplies, to come in from, sorry. Thank you. Could you hear what was going on before?
Yeah. Absolutely.
Keep you a bit off without it. Thank you. Thank you very much. The road from Armenia to Artsakh was the only way in for medical supplies, for food to come into people of Artsakh, and also for them to be able to go out, to be with their families. It turns out
We can hear.
Can you hear you? Is it better just because you don't have it?
No, it's good. No, it's fine because it was hitting here.
Okay. Sorry, I had that effect on me. But the road was the lifeline for the people of Artsakh from Armenia. And Azerbaijan cut it off and has kept it cut off, and it's still blocked. In spite of international representations,
I
Azerbaijan.
need to apologize.
No need to apologize, you did a wonderful job.
Sorry.
Very good.
Thank you.
Okay. Is that okay?
Yes.
Am I deafening you?
No.
Well, if it's wrong, just let me know. But that road is a real lifeline for the people of Artsakh. And as I say, for medical supplies, for food, for people to get out from Karabakh into Armenia for surgical operations that are needed. The International Committee for the Red Cross have been very good at helping people and getting some supplies in, but hardly anything that's sufficient. And when we talk to Vardan, he tells us the shops are empty, there's no food in the shops, no vegetables. It really is a very serious situation, potentially another impending genocide. And then there was the war in September 2020 when Azerbaijan attacked the little land of Nagorno-Karabakh or Artsakh, and they now occupy about 2/3 of it, probably, sadly, and they've already started their horrible policies of destruction. They've already destroyed at least one church, if not more. And one of the great worries is that Azerbaijan has a terrible track record of destroying cultural heritage, and particularly spiritual cultural heritage, the churches. I don't know, Nakhchivan was part of Armenia that Stalin gave to Azerbaijan, and that had some of the most wonderful old cathedrals and churches and stone crosses and so on that you could have. And of course, being the first nation to become Christian, some of the oldest in the world. And sadly, Azerbaijan obliterated all that. If you drive in Nakhchivan now, you wouldn't know there'd been anything there at all. And there's a great fear that that's what they might do to Nagorno-Karabakh if they are given control over Karabakh and a free hand to do what they wish. Baku is also making life difficult for the Armenians living in Artsakh with the blockade of the road, where food should be coming in and medical supplies. And recently they set up more blockages. I won't go into all the details, but a lot of that road now is not only blocked by Azerbaijan, but also Russia is sadly meant to be peacekeepers, ceasefire controllers, and sadly they have not done what they might hope they could have done to ensure that road is kept open. And one of Azerbaijan's checkpoints now on that road is located right next to a base of Russian peacekeepers. We're meant to be keeping that road open, but it further erodes the credibility of Russia and its peacekeeping contingent to uphold the 2020 ceasefire agreement. So this is something that's very serious and needs a lot of prayer. I think it's appropriate just to highlight the seriousness of this situation because it could represent another impending genocide, including enforced evacuation of Armenians from the wonderful historic land of Artsakh. And as I've already mentioned, there's a fear that if Azerbaijan obtains control of Artsakh, it may carry out the annihilation of Armenian historic churches, other historic treasures, such as stone crosses, which it has done in Nakhchivan and already in parts of Artsakh which it controls. So briefly, the current situation needs a lot of prayer. There are serious shortages of food and medicines, but still wonderful, resilient people. I have a very close friend. She's an Armenian from Australia. She travelled with me on my very first visit in the 1990s, called Armenian. And she stayed in Artsakh, And she has married, and she's bringing up her family in Artsakh, and she sends us reports, including this, and I'll just do one short quotation, but it's very indicative of the spirit of the people of Armenia who are currently trapped inside your holy land of Artsakh. I now quote, this is from Martinus. Only Artsakh people would have done so, remaining here, proud and strong as we are. The enemy, world leaders should all know that by closing the only road, the road for life for 120,000 people, by the enemy, that will not force us to give up. It won't make us lose the will. It won't make us lose the will to fight for the right to live as normal human beings. On the contrary, it makes them far more united and far stronger to face even harder times. That's the spirit of your people in Artsakh. Strength, courage, and determination. They're not going to give up. And I'm going to finish with just 2 examples of inspiration of your heroic people in Artsakh. You may have heard this before, but the first I'll never forget is a farmer. Remote area farming, not high-level education and agricultural degrees or anything, local peasant farmer. I met him in the days of the 1990s war. His family members had been killed, and then he saw the body of an Armenian girl hanging from a tree, and her body had been cut into 2. He wept, and he vowed revenge. Then he told us that later, when he encountered an Azeri who could have killed her, he couldn't do it. And I congratulated him on his compassion and his dignity. And his reply was very simple and profound, just from a farmer in the remote lands of Artsakh. But one sentence is a wonderful sentence. Dignity is a crown of thorns. What spirituality, what inspiration. And I'm always humbled and inspired by the dignity of Armenians in Artsakh, living in hellish conditions of war inflicted by Azerbaijan. And my final message is from the former Archbishop of Artsakh, many of you will know him, Archbishop Martyrosian. And I was in Stepanakert back in the 1990s, the day when his house got a direct hit with a bomb from Azerbaijan. Now, this is winter, and in those war days there was no electricity, so it was dark, it was cold, very cold, but Archbishop Martyrosian would get up every morning 7 o'clock to pray, in the dark, in the cold. And this particular morning, he had just got up to pray, in the dark and in the cold. His house got a direct hit. And on the bed where he would have been lying was a large bomb that would have crushed him. He was very shocked and shaken, but he was alive. I visited him in the afternoon. His home was still smouldering with fire, but I shall never forget his words. He must have been shaken by the bomb, by nearly being killed by it, by his burning home, and I asked him what he felt about the situation, and I'll never forget his words. And I quote them quite often because it's so inspirational. He said, "Our nation has again defined its faith after 70 years of Soviet communism, and we are praying in churches, in cellars, and in the field, and on the field of battle, defending our life and the hearts of those who are near and dear." Then there's a challenge. It's not only the perpetration of crime and evil which commits sin, but also those who stand by, seeing and knowing, but who do not condemn it or cry out against it. That, I'm afraid, the British government, too often, and many others. But then, blessed are the peacemakers. They will be called sons of God. And here's an amazing message now to all the suffering he and his people are going through, 400 grad a day, slaughter of children and everything else. He said, "We do not hate. We believe in a God of love. If we want God's victory, we must love. Even if there are demonic forces at work, not only in this conflict, but in other parts of the world, we must still love. We must always love." And that's a wonderful message coming from your people who suffered genocide and suffering really another impending genocide in Artsakh today. We need all our prayers. But thank you for holding the front line of faith and freedom for the rest of the world. And it is a privilege to be here as you remember the genocides and as we think of your present suffering. But thank you for all you do. as I've said, for holding that front line of faith and freedom for the rest of us. You can never thank you enough. God bless you.